Thank you for tuning in and hello. If you are just tuning in or you are just joining me live, make sure you hit the followers button and that will be amazing. I know I really appreciate all of you. And if you hit the followers button, hit the like, and do all this, it's very, very crucial and very important. And I duly appreciate you for joining me live on TikTok. I want to recaption the word used by William Ruto, the Kenyan president. Here comes to, but I want to first of all appreciate all of you that are joining me in this edition of this live broadcast on the hard call of African infrastructural development. It is very important that we talk. I know many of you are joining me. Anyway, but somebody want to ask where I am speaking to. I am speaking from the great state of Texas here in the United States. But however, somebody asking, can you join live? Of course, you can send a request and I will allow you to join me in this edition of this broadcast. It is very, very important, very crucial. It's very crucial. And I focus more on infrastructural development, this key message, infrastructural development of Africa. It requires a joint effort for all of us. It requires, if you have traveled, I know the last speaker whom I spoke to has experience. She's based in France. She had an experience of travel to Africa, and she was speaking from her own perspective. She was speaking from her own perspective, having experienced the crisis. And I am sure if you recently traveled to Africa, the nightmare that welcome you is the law of, they call it the forces of law and disorder, or they call it the force of law and order, but I call it the forces of law and disorder. Your experience when you just landed at the airport, the first thing is you first admire the corruption system. It's almost a nightmare for you to even take off the next flight and back to where you came from, because you feel like it is absolutely nothing. There's no base to start up the cleaning of Africa for the common good of Africa. But one unfortunate thing is that when you are given that opportunity to take on the same, because you are based on your experience, maybe from United States, maybe from Britain, France, UK, China, Russia, wherever you're coming from. But when you're given that opportunity of leadership, it seems like it totally ignore the fundamental question that you've been asked. That what is my goal? What is my objective? What I intend to accomplish? But the problem and the corroborated problems, before I go into that, let's look at the crisis. There is a meeting, I'm sure if the meeting has ended, in Kenyan capital, led by the Kenyan president, William Ruto. The purpose of that meeting was reinculcate, I'm lacking a good word. The Kenyan, the purpose was climate change, but the tune of that meeting was more than just a climate change. The tune of the meeting is more than a climate change. And I listened to the European representative during the Kenyan summit. The European representative during the Kenyan summit emphasized that they want to work with Africa. They want a partnership with Africa. That was the first of its kind to hear the tune of the Europeans that has changed. They want a partnership. They want to work with Africa. It is very, 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 and you can listen to the culture, language that has been changed and to the tone. And you understand that we, Africa, we turn to place someone that has memory impairment, lack of judgment. Let's take, for example, because when I cite something, you can understand where I'm coming from. You all watch in Nigeria. In Nigeria, they have all the quality of the people, but yet they have a doormat at the helm of a government of Nigeria. They call Tinubu. Tinubu is absolutely a doormat. Why should him? And that is why you see what they call the coup d'etat. Coup d'etat, for those who are not familiar with the word coup d'etat, is a military takeover of an existing government. So it's called a coup d'etat. It's because a certain clique, they call the elite. Why would someone like Tinubu become a president of a country? He cannot be a president of educational system. He cannot be a governor. Why should we have someone at the helm of a government of a sovereign country who is mentally deranged? The Tinubu, who is the president of a country. And this is the problem of Africa, that people will mentor, people need to develop a start, people do need to be evaluated, of course, by a medical profession, an independent medical profession, to evaluate, and the person must publish the report, the result, indicate that this person in question qualified to be a president of a country. And that is why because when you look the intellectual capability of the people of Nigeria, you will admire them. But when you see who is at the helm of a government, it's deplorable. It's not just Nigeria, it's the rest of Africa combined. And William Ruto, his academic performance, his reasoning, his judgment, and he's putting forth a new dynamic culture for Africa. As you listen to him, he opened his statement. He says, you are at home, fellow African. You are at home, but the discussion will be very uncomfortable, but you must feel at home. We must air our grievances. We must air our grievances in order to build a foundation for the common good of Africa. Can you imagine, like in Cameroon, for example, in Cameroon, you have someone that urinate, voiding, urinate. That's his phobia. He is not even aware of his personal surrounding. He is not aware of his personal surrounding. He doesn't recognize his own children. He doesn't recognize where he lives. He cannot get out from his office to this, but he is a president of a country. Africa, we need a universal change. And the tone that reverberates by the Kenyan President William Ruto is an exemplary behavior that Africa must enumerate. We must have someone at the helm of a government that has the skill, the knowledge, the mental capability to be able to articulate the will of the sovereign people. And if we continue, and that is why you see, let's take for example in Cameroon in particular, the crisis, the Cameroon has two main issues. La République du Cameroon, there are two main issues. And this had to do with the colonial master France. This has to do with who? The colonial master France. France is an architect of manipulations. France is an architect of manipulations. It manipulates Africa in such a way that we become a doormat. And I think what you see in West Africa, where there is a military takeover, because the certainty has been overwhelmed the people and they were looking for solutions. And I'm sure the military coming in is coming in to relinquish the pain and suffering. Can you imagine within the couple of, years, you have military takeover from the civilian role? It's because there is embarrassment of these civilians that are working like a tools for most of the Europeans, most especially France in particular. Most especially France in particular. France distorted African, utilized African for their own personal egoistic means. Block every aspect of discussion when it reflects Africa. France is a distorting tools that is used against Africa. And this amplified knowledge that William Ruto, the president of Kenya, has reverberate and recalibrate Africa and to change the culture. Now, how does France manipulate for its own egoistic interests? Let's take, for example, the money, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. The IMF initially that it was created for the common good of the world, but that organization has been used deliberately against Africa. Let's take for example, let's give a typical example. Let's say United States. If United States, a typical example, United States might choose to, let's say, $1 billion infrastructural investment to one of, say, Niger, Cameroon, and any of those charge. $1 billion that the United States government offer as an educational incentive. This is how France does business. France asks Africa, asks the money, asks the host country that the United States government is allocating that amount of money to be deposited in France in Caisse Communautaire Française. To be deposited in Caisse Communautaire Française. That money has not been sent to Africa. Those are money allocated by the United States government for infrastructural investment. Now France took the money and put in Caisse Communautaire Française. France takes that money in which they have given from the United States and borrow to its colonial countries. France takes the money and borrow. And Africa is paying interest, a money that was allocated by the United States government, but now has become a money that Africa has to pay interest to France Caisse Communautaire Française, that the money initially does not belong to France. And it is quite amazing how France manipulates this doormat we call African leaders to its advantages. And that is why you see the cool leaders in West Africa are more young guys, because they are being deprived. They are being deprived of their will. This is the moment of the young generation, and yet they have people that have outlived their age, lived their destination, now occupy the youngest generation. And that is why you see the coup that is in West Africa are more of the young guys, because they feel betrayed. They feel destroyed their own culture. They feel destroyed their own moment in which they are growing up. Let's take, for example, get back to Tinubu and Paul Biya of Cameroon. Let's take a look at those two relatively. Paul Biya is 90 years old, has been in power close to 40 years. Give me your rationale why you believe Paul Biya should be a president to rule a generation that he has outgrown. Now, let's look back at Tinubu. Tinubu, in his court filing, if I'm not mistakenly, says he's 72 years old. In his court document filing as a Nigerian president, but his own daughter is 71 years old. Now, let's do the calculation. Let's do the math. And then let's think about it. Now, you can understand the fraudulent. Someone was sharing one of his credentials. He says he graduated from Chicago University. In Chicago University, Tinubu is not found in Chicago University. How did Tinubu become a graduate from a Chicago University where there is no document indicate that he graduated from there? So, if you cannot articulate, if you cannot express, and why will you lie on behalf of the most intelligent people of Nigeria? And this is the problem of Africa. How can we collaborate? How can we collaborate, work together for the infrastructure development? Let's take, for example, the recent coup that happened in Gabon. The recent coup that just happened in Gabon. Imagine 40-something billions found in a president's own house. And he wants to be a president. His parents, his father was a president, he became a president, so they have ruled up to 56 years, if somebody can correct me that. And you find people suffering. And you imagine somebody ruled for 50-something years, one single family. It is amazing how we are dark. We are corrupted. We need a new form of structural, new form of educational system that can change the culture of Africa to have a mentality that focuses on rational and critical thinking, looking at the ways to ameliorate an African dynamic that reflects. Let's take, for example, China. It took China less than 20 years to become a superpower. Less than 20 years. It's because they restructured the education system. They put on investment. They understand what it is and what they are working towards. If you are just joining me, please don't hesitate to hit the like button and hit the followers button. I really appreciate all of you, and it is very amazing that I want to thank you for joining me in this broadcast. It is amazing, and I love you guys. But make sure you hit the love button down there and the followers button, because I am going to go through and see. So I appreciate all of you, but it is important that you hit the followers button and the like button and the whatever you can hit. Don't hesitate, just hit all of them. I appreciate you. But this is Daniel speaking about what can we as an African change the culture to build an environment that is suitable. I remember, let me take you through a typical example that happened to me. I traveled. My dad had a hip fracture. And I went to the hospital. The X-ray machine that was used to X-ray the hip of my dad was something that was utilized in United States in the 40s, in the 1940s. Imagine the president of Paul Biya carry an entourage spending almost 800,000 US dollar daily with his entourage. Whereas a hospital lacks the fundamental equipment just to do a simple x-ray. You can understand the pain and frustration that is happening. The pain and the frustrations. The pain is not what you see, what people going through. And guess what? Who is suffering? The younger generations, the older parents, those living in a rural area. And you see why military takeover is necessary. And let's take, for example, France is condemning the coup d'etat in Niger because when the army saw the suffering of their children, the suffering of their relatives, the suffering of their family, and they see someone hanging in the throne of the government, whereas the people are suffering in a disproportionately, then the military will take the guns against you. And that is a coup d'etat that is necessary for the common good. They said in literature, they said do good. In literature, they said in this guy Emmanuel Kant, if I'm not mistaken for his name, I like his argument in literature. Say do good for the common good of all. Do no harm. Do no harm. Do good for the common good of mankind. It is imperative. It is imperative that Africa needs an infrastructural investment bank that has the modality that is controlled by an African, that provides an investment infrastructural development. And how can investment infrastructural development exist? Let's look in Nigeria. Let's go back to Nigeria and look at the good part of it. You see, there's a car company. They call what is it if you have the names? There is this manufacturing car industries. Those are an energetic that they ought to be promoted and conduct research on the basic need of African development. For example, Caterpillar that we use driving, because the problem of Africa is infrastructural development, road network. It is the poorest. When you travel, you feel like you're almost about to vomit. Because why would someone keep billions in his account whereas there's no road development? Come on. It is a nightmare. It is a nightmare. Why would the Gabonese president, why would Paul Biya, of course, you all saw recently, or even not recently, someone in Cameroon that he has money that was shredded because he arbitrarily put in his private room or his house and fell there. It is not just the similar case. There was a scenario where someone burned the money. Why will you keep money? I think it should be instituted that it is a crime having a certain amount of money in your house, and that should be placed under firing squad. It is a crime to have a certain amount of money in your home. And they should also guarantee people who have those excess money to put into bank and allow the money to in circulations. Because this has impacted liquidity in circulations. It has impacted liquidity in circulation. Now, when we talk about liquidity, but my question now is, why should Africa their money be printed by the French. Does that make sense? Does France money printed in Africa? If France money does not be printed in Africa, why should French money, if France money is not printed in Africa, why should France be printing African money? So Africans need to start off free from itself, free from colonial rule, free from colonial rule. They need to recalibrate. And to be able to recalibrate, how can they recalibrate? Africa can recalibrate if they institute, the first thing is a democratic institution. I know someone will say, oh, it hasn't worked in Africa. Well, how would you, let me tell you why a democratic institution can institute and function. It has functioned in Europe. You all remember the French Revolution, Leopold Bonaparte, Charles X, William I, William II, William the 18th. Those were the brutal leadership. You know, so someone says, you know, we experience with the experience like the Europeans, you know, they went through this crisis that Africa is going there. You have Charles X, you have from the age of enlightenment to the French revolutions, they all see that the dictatorship from Charles X, he says his hate is to the people like his body is, his hate is to the people of France like his body is to the people of France like his head. You know, but whatever it is, but they went through crisis and they come to the conclusion that a sovereign democratic institution where leadership are peacefully transferred from one person to another is the most sound means in which society can function. That we all agree upon. But when you have someone in the helm of an African institution for 10, 20, 15, 30 years, that is a no-no that Africa should in all way discard, disband. And that is why you see the military are the most self-disciplined organism in Africa. But unfortunately, when they see this behavior and the feeling that one person in power for 20, 30 years, that is absolute and ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. And that is this very painful that we watch. And I'm thinking, this vibration of this change of culture that we are looking for who and this 21st century, that we must limit who can govern and at what term, and that information need to be made public, and we don't need to have someone in power that basically has nothing to offer. Let's go back to Nigeria again, to the current, what they so-called Tinubu. He has been a governor. He has been a governor for one of the most prosperous. He has been a governor for one of the most prosperous states in Nigeria, the Lagos state. So what else does he need? What else does he need? Why does he want to become a leader when he has already been a governor? And given the terms, his age, his reasoning, he cannot even govern. Why do you want to leave control a different generation, the younger generation. They have a dynamic people that can be able to manage the government of Nigeria and that has a vision for the common good of Africa as a whole. But yet you have someone that is deranged. In Cameroon, the neighboring country, the same. Now, why does France like all this behavior? Because it is easy for France to manipulate. You know, I am glad. You understand the war they wanted to declare against the Niger. And they were even planning. That was the worst mistake Nigeria would have done, to declare war on Niger. When they are fighting the forces of evil of France. That is what they did. Why should an African be suffering? In Africa, that should be something a no-no. And you listen to the European leader and he addressing and the one interesting thing that I also listened was the US representative, John Kerry. There's one important thing that I listened. John Kerry message. Of course, United States, I know many people will criticize the United States. I also criticize the United States. But it is the most reasonable people. They understand the problem. They understand and they speak up when it comes to terms of speak up. And that is the good thing about the United States. Whereas Europe, they do not. So long as it benefits them than the host country. And that is why clearly example of France in particular. Because France is a virus that is destroying Africa development. France. Let's look at, for example, for you, if you are familiar with of course, when you speak about Cameroon, most people think about just Cameroon as a republic. In Cameroon in particular, there are two sovereign countries. There are two. The Southern Cameroon, which is, they often use the word English speaking, which is a minute word they use to downgrade and degrade the people of Southern Cameroon. Southern Cameroon has the English speaking. So to convert that, listen, the institute called the Ambazonians. Because in Cameroon, there are two identical countries that are living together. But France, the masterminded lead architect of manipulations, through its colonial instigator, La République du Cameroun, has assimilated the people of Southern Cameroon, to what they call La République du Cameroun. Now, for those who are from Cameroon that are listening to this, let me make this clear for your clear understanding. When France, let me go back to the United Nations document 1514 XV. That is the United Nations resolution that was voted by the allied nations, that those territories that were under the allied control. In speaking about allied control, we mean Britain, France, and those allies that fought against the Japan during the Second World War. They came to a resolution that they call 1415 XV. By virtue of that resolutions, it was agreed upon that those territories that were under the colonial administration be given the rightful independence. The people of Southern Cameroon was one of the most democratic institutions in West Africa. Southern Cameroon, for your understanding, was the first democratic institution in the entire West Africa, including Nigeria and Ghana. So how did the people of Southern Cameroon become a province in a foreign country, La République du Cameroun? Now, by virtue of that resolution 1514 XV, that all the territories that were under the colonial administration be given the rightful independence, the people of Southern Cameroon were deprived their right as an independent country. under the British administrative authority led by Sir Andrew Cohen. That was the British administrator in the Enugu House of Assembly in Nigeria. He managed the British territory in West Africa, and the head office was based in Enugu in Nigeria. So, the elected representative of its colonial territory will meet there to discuss the issues related to its colonial administrations. The people of Southern Cameroon has demonstrated by electing its Prime Minister, Dr. Endele, second Prime Minister, Jongu Foncha, and the third, Joa. The people of Southern Cameroon has developed the skillful relationship where they can have their own sovereign government, elect their leader, transfer power peacefully without any war or fighting. Now, why is France so hated in West Africa? One, on the French-speaking part, La République du Cameroun, as I call it, was the single name that was given at the United Nations, La République du Cameroun. That name was presented by its colonial master France, which became an independent country in West Africa. So, there was supposed to be a democratic institution that should take place. First was the UPC. The leader of the UPC won 26 members of the National Assembly in La République du Cameroun. But the philosophy in which they stood by was against France in particular. So France disbanded that party. And that's why you see that it's just a reverberation of what is happening in Niger. They want Nigeria to declare war so that they can supply arms in Niger. But now let's look at La République du Cameroun once more. So when the majority party that was supposed to form a government in La République du Cameroun, led by the UPC, won 26 members of parliament, that party in the called UPC was banned by France, and its members were guillotined. Guillotine is a form of execution that was instituted in France. So many members of the UPC were guillotined, killed. And that has been the attitude of France in Africa. And that's why I'm bringing this for those who are not aware of this vital information and what France has dealt with Africa since immemorial. So let's see now. So UPC, the leader that was supposed to lead the government, the formation of a government in La République, was banned, and the leaders were hunted by France. So what happened next? So those leaders who were hunted, some seek asylum. Listen carefully. The leaders of UPC in La République du Cameroun are now seeking asylum in southern Cameroon, looking for safe haven. And now, as of today that I am speaking, southern Cameroon has become a province in a foreign country, La République du Cameroun. And you can understand the pain that Africans are going through. And this has to do with the clause of the United Nations. And what is the clause? The clause said that only member of the United Nations can present a case at the United Nations. Implies that, so those territory that has not been a full nation as they claim to be, because the British should have done his job by giving the independence of Southern Cameroon. Now, the people of Southern Cameroon cannot present its case because they have blocked every aspect for those territories to file a case at the United Nations. And now you can see the fraudulence of the organization, that it does not, United Nations and the IMF does not represent the aspiration of Africa. Now you see why gun is an option for Africa to take off, because they can't get their problem resolved. Imagine Southern Cameroon was a European country. Imagine Southern Cameroon was a European country. That case would have been brought up to be debated and discussed. But because it's in Africa, it doesn't matter to them. It doesn't. And that is why gun is an option that Africa has no choice. because their issues can never be discussed elsewhere. Every aspect is blocked. Now let's go back to the Southern Cameroon and La République again. So when the UPC, that was the leader that was supposed to form government of La République, was disbanded, France picked this useless guy they call Amadou Ahidjo. Amadou Ahidjo was an yes sir tools. What do you understand? A yes sir. Somebody just agree. Was a yes sir tool of France. And so he was instituted to form a government. Remember, La République did not even have a constitution as I'm speaking. So La République did not even have a constitution. La République ameliorated a constitution based on what the draft already have in Southern Cameroon. La République never have a drafted constitution. And so that is why when you look at La République, they have no document to reflect on. But the people of Southern Cameroon has a constitution that was presented to its representative at Enugu House of Assembly in Nigeria, that was adopted and voted, and which lead to the formation of a government in Southern Cameroon. But La République never have a government. They never have a constitution. And yet, the people of Southern Cameroon has become a province in a foreign country, La République du Cameroon. Now you can understand the pain and frustration when it comes to Africa. In 2016, when this crisis erupted, it began in Southern Cameroon when Southern Cameroon began to question the validity of La République ownership of Southern Cameroon. And the sons and daughters are not. Then how does France prevent any case of Southern Cameroon to be debated upon? Now, France blocked every aspect by instituting its various organs, like for example the West African United Nations representative is from a French colonial territory. The OAU Secretary General is from Africa, is from French colonial territory. So those various organs are all French. And who is the key and manipulator? France. And now you can see the pain why Africans are so hateful when it comes to France. Because they are the most worst people in Africa. And when in terms of looking at who can you trust, Africa does not in any way trust France at all. And that is why you see the Niger government has asked them completely to eradicate them all from its territory. France is the masterminded that instituted coup. For example, let's say if they are particular concerned about the the government of Chad, when the Chadian president was overthrown, guess who was the first person to install the military government? It was Emmanuel Macron who went there. Do you know what happens? Of course, all of you can deduce it. All of us can deduce that it was initiative of France. And that is why you can understand why Africa needs a leadership that has the interest of Africa, not the interest of France. So it began, you and I. We need to bring these conversations. We need to speak up. We need to join. As William Ruto, the president of Kenya. So it is a spirit that it shouldn't die. But I disagree with William Ruto when he says that the military junta, I know he was fearful for his own position when he starts seeing military taking over. No, the military are not stupid. The military are not stupid. Because the problem has come to a point that they need to do something about it. Imagine what is happening in Southern Cameroon. How many military has been blown off? But they are supporting someone, La République du Cameroon. How many of their colleagues have been killed in Southern Cameroon territory? But yet, they have a doormat. Someone that is mentally deranged, Pobia, he cannot articulate himself. He cannot, because he is in a worse state, the 4th stages of dementia. He is at the 4th stages of dementia, Pobia of Cameroon. So imagine a person at the 4th stages of dementia is ruling a military government, ruling a civilian, ruling appointed government, somebody at the 4th level of dementia. It is embarrassing for all the African concerned. Why should he be there in the first place when he cannot even articulate his children, his government, who is in his cabinet? Because there are certain clique, people from his village, they call Vomeka. They control every aspect of arm. They control ammunition. They control every aspect. And so they just there. For sake, we are there. En tant que le président de la République. Quel président? It is absolutely disturbing. Someone at the 4th stages level of dementia, but he's the president of a country, and people are just on. They do not even question his knowledge, his intellectual ability, and how can he be governing a country when he cannot even articulate his daughter's name, where he lives, which room he lives in his presidential palace. It's just like a dog in chain that are just being dragged and going round and round and round. That is what is happening in Cameroon. Africa, we need to grow. We need to grow. Hey, don't get away. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you follow. Make sure you do something. So I love you guys. And I want to take a moment I really appreciate all of you that are joined in, that are tuned in this evening. But I want to let us know that it is imperative that we, Africa, we need to do something. Why there is not infrastructural development? You live in this amazing nation. Let's take, for example, the United States. When you live, you travel, you feel frustrated because the nature of road infrastructural development are in deplorable state. And yet, we have the resources more than the European combined, and yet they live happily, but we are yet to. Why should some of our brothers and sisters are thinking, crossing to Europe, whereas the resources that is used to build Europe comes from Africa? You see the dynamic hypocrisy that we inherited, and we need to start developing the skill, the knowledge, and it began by speaking up, and speaking up re-energize and re-tune and change the culture that we can do better. We can do better. I understand we can. Yes, we can. Let me borrow the philosophy, the song, I don't know what they call it, the song of President Obama. Yes, we can. Yes, African, we can. We can change the culture. Because when you listen the climate address and the European representative, the message has changed. Their message to Africa has changed. They want to work with Africa. They want to invest with Africa. It's not that they're going to dictate. They want to invest with Africa. But then, we'll have to think about it. We have to think about it. How? We need to be ready when they come and be able to look at what is in that table. You know, I love William Ruto. So if you are not on the table, then you can't be able to discuss what it is. So Africa need to be on the table. And for Africa to be on the table, we need to disband the IMF because it does not function to the interest of Africa. World Bank, they call the World Bank and IMF of infrastructural development. We need to disband it and begin a new phase of infrastructural development that Africa is on the table. Yes, Africa need to be on the table. And that is how we have to do it. Yes. My next lecture will be the foundation of education system that will reflect the new changing dynamic of the world, Africa. Education system is something that we need to uproot what we have and restructure an education system that reflect the industrial complex of Africa. You are watching China. China is investment, its infrastructural investment. It's something we have to enumerate. It's something we have to. Instead of borrowing money to the IMF, that money will be kept in Caisse Communautaire Française. And that money, Caisse Communautaire Française, will loan the money again to us. So it has 3 channels that money pass through before you get into Africa. No, we have to create our own infrastructural investment bank in Africa that meet the cultural aspiration of Africa, where every African will be able to have those access to those loans. That investment is for the common good of Africa. This is the spirit that I am advocating. This is the spirit we will stand for, and that is the spirit we must use. And I want to take a moment to thank all of you for watching. But before you leave, make sure you hit the like button. It was me speaking here, and the future of Africa of the 21st century. And thank you, and have a wonderful good night.